Welcome to Lore of the Ring, where we uncover the hidden roads of Middle-earth and tell the tales that Tolkien never wrote. Before we begin, take a moment to let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day or night this narration has reached you. There are places in Middle-earth where the very stone remembers, where the walls carry not just the weight of mountains, but the weight of ages, kingdoms risen and ruined, glories sung and silenced. And of all such places, none whisper more darkly, more tragically, than the halls beneath the misty mountains. Khazad dûm. Dwarven, Moria. 3 names for one truth. The greatest kingdom ever wrought by mortal hands, now a tomb of darkness and flame. A place so vast that its eastern gate lies miles from its western door. A place so deep that sunlight has never touched its lowest halls. A place so silent now that even the bravest dare not enter without trembling. But it was not always so. Once, this was the jewel of the Dwarven race. Once, laughter echoed in those halls. Hammers rang upon anvils. Songs rose to vaulted ceilings higher than cathedral domes. And mithril gleamed like captured starlight in the hands of smiths who shaped the bones of the earth itself. Once, elves walked those corridors as friends. Once, kings ruled there in unbroken succession, tracing their lineage back to Durin the Deathless, eldest of all the fathers of the dwarves. Once. But kingdoms do not fall in a single night. Not truly. Oh, there are moments. Battles lost, kings slain, gates breached, that history remembers as the end. But the true fall, that is slower, quieter. It begins long before the final blow, in choices made in darkness, in veins of ore pursued too greedily, in alliances allowed to wither, in warnings unheeded. Khazad dûm did not collapse, it eroded. And beneath that erosion, something ancient stirred. This is not a tale of monsters alone, though a monster dwells at its heart. This is not a story of greed alone, though greed carved the path to ruin. This is a chronicle of inevitability, of a kingdom that grew too mighty, delved too deep, stood too proud, and forgot that even stone can break. The texts are fragmentary. Tolkien left us pieces. Entries in appendices, passages in the Silmarillion, notes in unfinished tales, hints in the mouths of characters who lived millennia after the fall. The full story has never been told in one place, never been gathered from the margins and the margins of margins where the professor hid his most haunting truths. Until now. We will walk those halls as they were, bright and bustling, filled with the laughter of craftsmen and the light of crystal lamps. We will trace the mithril veins that fed an empire. We will stand beside Celebrimbor at the west gate, forging friendship between dwarf and elf. We will hear the hammers fall silent as miners break through into something that should have remained sealed. We will watch the fire rise. We will see Durin VI descend into shadow. We will witness the slow, agonizing exodus of a people who refused to believe their greatest creation could ever fall. And we will ask the questions that have haunted scholars and dreamers alike. Could it have been prevented? Was it greed or desperation? Was it pride or fate? Why did the dwarves not fight back? And could Khazad dûm, against all hope, ever be reclaimed? The answers lie deep, deeper than mithril, deeper than memory. Let us descend. In the First Age, when the world was young and the stars were new, the Vala Alla the smith, he who shaped the bones of the earth and loved the act of making above all things, grew impatient. The children of Iluvatar, the elves and men destined to inherit Middle-earth, had not yet awakened. And Alle, in his eagerness, wrought in secret 7 beings of his own design, the fathers of the dwarves. Iluvatar, the One, discovered this unauthorized creation and rebuked Oled gently. But seeing the smith's remorse and love for his creations, Iluvatar granted them true life and adopted them into the music of the Aenir. Yet they would not awaken before the elves. They would sleep deep beneath the mountains until the firstborn stirred. And so they slept. The eldest of them, placed beneath the peak of Mount Gundabad in the misty mountains, was Durin. Durin the Deathless. Durin, who would wake alone and wander south through stone and shadow until he came to a hidden valley where 3 peaks stood sentinel over a dark, still lake. And in that lake, beneath the stars, he looked down and saw above his head a crown of 7 stars reflected in the water, the constellation the elves would call Valasurka, the sickle of the valor. He took this as a sign. And there, beside that mirrored lake, he founded Khazad dûm, the Dwarodelf, the mansion of the dwarves. From that single hall, the kingdom grew, not swiftly, but inevitably, like crystal forming in the dark. Durin's folk carved chambers and corridors, mines and meeting halls, stairways that spiraled down into the mountain's heart and bridges that spanned chasms no light had ever crossed. They followed veins of ore, iron and copper, gold and silver, and built a realm unlike any the world had seen. For the dwarves were not mere miners. They were artists, architects, engineers of stone and metal whose works rivaled the elves' finest craft. The halls of Khazad dûm were not crude tunnels, but soaring galleries, their pillars carved to resemble the trunks of great trees, their ceilings vaulted and adorned with geometric beauty. Light was captured in crystals and mirrors, channeled through shafts and chambers, so that even the deepest halls glowed softly, as if lit by some hidden sun. Water flowed through aqueducts and reservoirs. Air moved through ventilation shafts so cunningly designed that no stale breath ever lingered. The forges burned bright and clean, their smoke drawn up and away. The city was alive, a living, breathing thing of stone and flame. And at its heart, deeper than the deepest mine, lay Durin's most sacred halls, the chamber of Mazarbul, the hall of records, and beneath it all, the tomb where Durin himself would one day be laid to rest. For Durin lived long, longer than any dwarf before or since. So long that his people called him deathless, though he was not immortal, merely blessed, perhaps, or cursed with a lifespan that stretched across centuries. He saw his kingdom grow from a single hall to a city of thousands. He saw alliances forged with the elves of Beleriand in the west. He saw his people prosper beyond all imagining. And he saw, in the deep places, the glint of something no other mine in Middle-earth possessed. Mithril, true silver, Moria silver. The metal that could be hammered thin as silk yet never lose its strength. Lighter than steel, harder than dragon scale, beautiful as moonlight. The elves coveted it for jewelry and armor. The dwarves hoarded it for their greatest works. It could not tarnish, it could not break. And it was found nowhere else in the world, only here in the roots of the misty mountains, in veins so rich they seemed inexhaustible. Mithril became the lifeblood of Khazad dûm. It fueled trade. It bought alliances. It made the dwarves indispensable to the elven smiths of a region, who dwelt just beyond the western mountains. In the Second Age, when Celebrimbor, greatest of elven craftsmen and grandson of Feanor himself, ruled in a region, he forged a bond with the dwarves that seemed unbreakable. Together they created wonders, rings of power, gates of Ithildin, mail coats that could turn aside any blade. The doors of Durin, the West Gate, were crafted in this golden age. Made by Celebrimbor and the dwarf lord Narvi working in tandem, the doors were not of wood or bronze, but of mithril-inlaid stone, inscribed with runes that gleamed only in starlight or moonlight. The inscription read, "The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria. Speak, friend, and enter." A riddle, a welcome, a symbol of trust between elf and dwarf. Those were the days of peace. The days when the West Gate stood open, and elves walked freely through the halls of Khazad dûm, marveling at the craftsmanship of stone and the beauty of the mithril veins. The days when dwarven caravans traveled west to a region and east to the Iron Hills, laden with trade goods and songs. Khazad dûm was not merely a kingdom. It was the kingdom, the crown jewel of the dwarven race. A city of tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, living in a realm so vast it could house armies, so deep it touched the roots of the world. But depth has a price. And the deeper you go, the older the things you wake. By the end of the Second Age, the kingdom had endured for over 5,000 years. Durin had long since died, though his heirs, each named Durin in his honor, for the dwarves believed his spirit returned again and again, ruled in unbroken succession. The mithril still flowed. The forges still burned. The alliances still held. But cracks were forming. Faint. Almost imperceptible. The question that haunts every historian who studies this age is simple. How could such a kingdom fall, not suddenly, but slowly, silently over centuries? What force could topple a realm that had endured since the world's youth? Was it greed? Was it fate? Or was it something far older, far darker, waiting patiently beneath the stone? Let us speak plainly of a truth uncomfortable to some. The dwarves were not innocent. Tolkien did not write them as villains, far from it. He admired their resilience, their craft, their loyalty to kin and stone. But he also imbued them with a tragic flaw, woven into their very nature by Alle's hand. A flaw the professor described in letters and texts with sorrow, not condemnation. The dwarves loved the work of their hands more than the things themselves. They were makers, yes, but they were also possessors, hoarders, and in that hoarding lay a dangerous blindness. Once they set their hearts on something gold, jewels, mithril, they could not let it go. They could not stop. They delved, they mined, they pursued veins of ore deeper and deeper, long past the point of need, long past the point of reason. Thorin Oakenshield would one day fall prey to this same curse, clutching the Arkenstone as his kingdom burned. Thrain would lose the last dwarf ring to madness and dragon fire. The line of Durin was, again and again, undone by desire. But was it greed alone? Or was it something more complex, more tragic? Consider the timeline. By the latter half of the Second Age, Khazad dûm had been mined for millennia. The surface veins, the easy ore, the shallow mithril were dwindling. Not gone, but harder to find. And mithril was not merely a luxury. It was the foundation of the kingdom's economy, the currency of its alliances, the reason Eregion valued Khazad dûm's friendship. What happens to a kingdom when its primary resource begins to fade? Does it adapt? Diversify? Seek other means of prosperity? Or does it dig deeper? The dwarves chose depth. They extended the mines downward, following the veins as they tapered and twisted into the mountain's heart. They carved new shafts, new tunnels, new galleries in the dark. They pushed past the boundaries their ancestors had set, past the markers that warned. Here the stone grows hot, here the air grows thin, here the old places sleep. They ignored the warnings. This is where the narrative grows murky, for Tolkien does not give us a clear account of when the deep delving began in earnest. We know only that it happened, that at some point the dwarves of Khazad dûm broke through into chambers that should have remained sealed. chambers from the First Age, chambers older than their kingdom. Chambers where the bones of the world were laid bare, and the ancient darkness had taken refuge after the fall of Morgoth. But let us not be too quick to judge. Imagine you are a dwarf lord in those days. Your people number in the thousands. Your forges require fuel, your smiths require metal, your traders require goods to sell. The elves of a region depend on your mithril to craft their wonders. Your kingdom's survival depends on maintaining that flow. And the mithril is running out. What do? Abandon the mines. Watch your economy collapse. Become irrelevant in a world where power is measured in craft and trade. Or do you delve one level deeper, just one more shaft, just one more vein, and hope that the old stories about things sleeping beneath the mountains are nothing more than myth? This is the tragedy Tolkien understood so well. The dwarves were not fools. They were not wanton in their greed. They were desperate. And desperation, wrapped in pride, wrapped in tradition, wrapped in the belief that their skill could overcome any obstacle, that is a far more dangerous thing than simple avarice. Still, we cannot ignore the other thread. The texts, especially the Silmarillion and Appendix A, speak of the dwarves' love of wealth in tones that suggest more than economics. There is a hunger there, a possessiveness that goes beyond need. The 7 rings of power, given to the dwarf lords by Sauron, though they did not know his hand in it, amplified this trait. They did not corrupt the dwarves into wraiths as the 9 corrupted men, but they did kindle their greed, their desire for gold and gems, their willingness to dig ever deeper in pursuit of treasure. Did the dwarves of Khazad dûm possess one of these rings? Tolkien does not tell us directly, but the ring given to Durin's folk, the greatest of the 7, was lost eventually in the dragon hordes of the north. It is not impossible that it resided in Khazad dûm during the late 2nd or early 3rd Age, whispering in the ears of kings, urging them downward. Greed, desperation, enchantment, pride. Perhaps it was all of these. Perhaps it was none. Perhaps it was simply that the dwarves believed, truly, deeply believed, that the mountains were theirs by right, that the stone would yield to them as it always had, that they were masters of the deep places and nothing could challenge that mastery. And perhaps that belief was their greatest mistake. For deeper than mithril veins, deeper than the oldest mines, deeper than the memory of the dwarves themselves, something else began to stir. To understand what the dwarves awoke, we must journey backward, far backward to the First Age of the world, when the morning of time was still young and the great war against Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, raged across Beleriand. In those days, Morgoth commanded legions, orcs and trolls, dragons and werewolves, and among his most terrible servants, the Balrogs. Demons of fire and shadow, they were Maiar, spirits of the same order as Gandalf and Saruman, but corrupted by Morgoth in the depths of his fortress, Angband. They had once been beings of beauty and power in the timeless halls before the world's making, but they had fallen, seduced by Morgoth's promise of dominion and might. And in falling, they became monsters, wreathed in flame, wielding whips of fire, clad in darkness so thick that no light could pierce it. They were few in number. Tolkien suggested perhaps 3, perhaps 7, perhaps at most a dozen. But each was a force of devastation. They led Morgoth's armies. They slew elven lords and kings. Fëanor himself, mightiest of the Noldor, fell before them. They burned Gondolin. They shattered the gates of great fortresses. And when Morgoth was finally defeated, when the Valor themselves came to Beleriand in the War of Wrath and cast him into the void. His armies were destroyed, his fortresses torn down, and the land itself sank beneath the waves. Most of the Balrogs perished in that final cataclysm, but not all. Some fled. They hid in the deep places of the earth, beneath mountains and oceans, in caverns that had been carved by the shaping of the world. They slept. They waited. They endured through the long ages of the Second and Third Ages, unknown and forgotten, buried so deep that even the elves, who had fought them, believed them extinct. One such creature found refuge beneath the misty mountains. Deep beneath the roots of the Redhorn, in a chasm so far below the earth that no dwarf had ever delved there, it lay in darkness. Perhaps it had fled there after the fall of Angband. Perhaps it had been there even longer, driven into the deeps during some earlier conflict. Tolkien does not say. We know only that it was there, sleeping or half-sleeping or waiting in some state beyond mortal understanding. And for millennia, it remained undisturbed. Durin founded Khazad dûm above it, unknowing. The dwarves carved their halls, mined their ores, sang their songs, and below the fire slept on. Generations passed. Ages turned. The creature did not stir, until in the deepest mines, in the pursuit of the last and richest veins of Mithril, the dwarves broke through. The texts do not describe the moment in detail. We are given only fragments, a passing mention in Appendix A, a brief line in the Silmarillion, but we can imagine it. A crew of miners working in one of the lowest shafts, the air hot and close, the rock yielding reluctantly to pick and hammer, and then crack, a hollow sound, a fissure opening. Beyond it, not more stone, but space, vast, empty, echoing space. And from that space, a faint glow, red like embers. Perhaps one of the miners peered through the crack. Perhaps they felt the heat rising from below, hotter than any forge. Perhaps they heard something, not a sound, but a presence, a weight, a breathing. And perhaps before they could flee, the crack widened, and the fire woke. The Balrog did not emerge immediately into the halls of Khazad dûm. It was not a rampaging beast that exploded from the depths and slaughtered thousands in a single night. That is the common misconception, the dramatic image that lodges in the mind. No, the fall of Khazad dûm was slower. The creature stirred. It tested its prison. It moved through the deep places, relearning the shape of the world after its long sleep, and its presence alone was enough to spread terror. The deep mines became unbearable. Heat surged through the shafts. Miners reported tremors, strange lights, sounds like grinding metal and roaring flame. Some who ventured too far did not return. Others came back raving, speaking of shadows that moved against the light, of eyes like coals, of a voice that was not a voice but a pressure in the mind. The dwarves sealed the deepest shafts. They abandoned the lowest levels. They tried to contain it. But sealing a Balrog beneath stone is like trying to contain a volcano. The pressure builds, the heat rises, and eventually, inevitably, it breaks free. The creature began to move upward. It did not rush. It climbed. It explored. It reclaimed the deep places of the mountain as its domain. And wherever it went, flame and shadow followed. Stone cracked from the heat. Water boiled away. The air itself became poison. The dwarves, for all their craft and courage, had no answer for this. You cannot forge a weapon to kill fire itself. You cannot build a wall to hold back shadow. The Balrog was not an enemy that could be fought with axes and armor. It was elemental, primal. A fragment of the ancient world when the Valor themselves walked in wrath. And yet, here is the question that has puzzled scholars. The dwarves did not immediately abandon Khazad dûm. They endured. For years, perhaps decades, they held the upper halls while the creature prowled below. They redirected water to cool the mines. They collapsed tunnels to slow its ascent. They posted guards at every stairway leading downward, and those guards watched in shifts, listening for the sound of fire. Why did they not flee? Because Khazad dûm was not merely a city. It was their identity. It was the heart of their people, the monument to Durin, the proof that the dwarves were masters of stone. To abandon it would be to admit that something was stronger than they were, something they could not defeat, could not outlast, could not endure. Pride, desperation, love, all of these bound them to the mountain. But the Balrog was patient. It had waited through ages. It could wait a little longer. And when the king himself, Durin VI, heir to the deathless, lord of Khazad dûm in the Third Age, descended into the deep places to confront the terror and reclaim his kingdom, the fire rose to meet him. So why, if the Balrog did not instantly slaughter them, did the dwarves not fight or return? Before we witness the final confrontation, we must understand another wound, one that bled slowly, almost invisibly, but proved just as fatal as the fire below. Khazad dûm did not fall in isolation. Its doom was woven into the broader tapestry of the Second Age's collapse, a collapse that saw the greatest elven kingdom in Middle-earth destroyed, its lords slain, and the alliances that had sustained both elf and dwarf for centuries shattered beyond repair. We must speak of Eregion. Eregion, the Hallan of later days, lay just beyond the western slopes of the Misty Mountains. It was founded in the Second Age by Noldorin elves, those who had returned from the war against Morgoth and sought to create something beautiful in Middle-earth, something worthy of the lost glories of Beleriand. Its capital, Ost-in-Edhil, became a center of craft and learning, and its greatest smith, Celebrimbor, sought to rival even his grandfather Feanor in skill. Celebrimbor was drawn to the dwarves of Khazad dûm. Unlike many elves who viewed the dwarves with suspicion or disdain, he admired their craftsmanship, their precision, their understanding of metal and stone. He saw in them kindred spirits, makers like himself who valued the work above all. And the dwarves, in turn, welcomed him. The West Gate was opened. Trade flourished. Mithril flowed west. Elven craft flowed east. The two peoples learned from each other, collaborated, created wonders together. It was a golden age, perhaps the only time in the history of Middle-earth when elf and dwarf stood as true equals, partners in creation rather than rivals. But into this friendship came a shadow, Sauron. In the guise of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, he approached Celebrimbor and the smiths of Eregion with honeyed words and forbidden knowledge. He taught them the art of ring-making, the craft of binding power into objects, of preserving beauty against the decay of time. And Celebrimbor, eager to create something that would endure forever, listened. Together, they forged the rings of power, 9 for men, 7 for dwarves, and 3, the greatest, for the elves, wrought by Celebrimbor alone, without Sauron's direct touch, and therefore free from his immediate control. But Sauron had deceived them all. In secret, in the fires of Mount Doom, he forged the one ring, the ruling ring, into which he poured the greater part of his own power. And when he put it on, all the other rings answered to it. Their bearers felt the weight of his will. The deception was revealed. Celebrimbor, realizing the betrayal, hid the 3 rings and prepared for war. Sauron came with armies. Eregion fell. The siege was brutal. Ost-in-Edhil was razed. The elves were scattered. Celebrimbor was captured, tortured for the location of the 3 rings, and slain. His body was used as a banner by Sauron's forces. The dwarves of Khazad dûm sent aid, too late. By the time their armies reached the western slopes, Eregion was gone. The West Gate, once a symbol of friendship, now opened onto a land of ruin and ash. The gate was sealed. Not destroyed, the dwarves were too proud to erase such a work of beauty, but closed, its mechanisms locked, its runes fading. The traffic that had flowed between elf and dwarf ceased. The songs fell silent. The alliance withered. And Khazad dûm turned inward. Without Eregion, there was no reason to keep the West Gate open. The elves who survived fled north to Lindon or east to Lothlorien, where Galadriel and Celeborn had established a refuge. The roads became dangerous. Sauron's forces, though eventually driven back, left the lands scarred and hostile. Trade routes collapsed. Communication dwindled. Khazad dûm, once a hub of exchange and alliance, became an island. Isolation is a slow poison. It breeds suspicion. It turns communities inward, toward their own concerns, their own grievances. The dwarves, who had once laughed with elves over shared meals and collaborated on great works, now saw only empty halls and fading memories. The West Gate, locked and silent, became a monument to loss. And in that isolation, other problems festered. The population of Khazad dûm, though vast, was not replenishing itself. Dwarven women were few, perhaps only a third of the population, and many chose not to marry, devoted instead to craft or scholarship. Births were rare. The kingdom's numbers, though still great, were not growing. Meanwhile, the mines were failing. The mithril veins, pushed to their limits, were thinning. The easy wealth was gone. The dwarves had to dig deeper, work harder for less return. The economy, which had once been the envy of Middle-earth, began to strain. And the world outside, it moved on. Sauron was defeated for a time when Númenor fell and the last alliance of elves and men drove him from power. But that victory was distant. The dwarves played little part in it. They were forgotten, overlooked, left to endure in their mountain fastness while the great events of the age unfolded elsewhere. The Third Age began. And Khazad dûm, still grand, still proud, was no longer the center of anything. It was a relic, a monument, a kingdom that had outlived its era. And in isolation, even stone can crack. Picture a body suffering from a wasting disease. From the outside, it may still appear strong, broad-shouldered, upright, imposing. But inside, the systems are failing. The blood flows sluggishly. The organs strain. The bones grow brittle. And one day, without warning, the body collapses, not because of a single blow, but because the foundation was already crumbling. So it was with Khazad dûm. By the early Third Age, the kingdom endured, but it no longer thrived. The signs were everywhere if one knew where to look. The deep mines, sealed after the first stirrings of the Balrog, were lost. With them went the richest veins of mithril, the ore that had sustained the kingdom's economy for millennia. The dwarves turned to older, shallower mines, reworking veins their ancestors had already tapped. Yields dropped. Quotas went unmet. Without mithril to trade, the kingdom's wealth stagnated. The forges still burned, yes. The smith still crafted tools and weapons and wonders. But the surplus, the abundance that had once made Khazad dûm the wealthiest realm in Middle-earth, was gone. Every ounce of ore mined now went toward maintaining what remained, not expanding. And maintenance is the language of decline. The water systems, too, began to fail. Khazad dûm's aqueducts were marvels of engineering, fed by underground springs and rivers that flowed through the mountain's heart. But the deep delving had disrupted those flows. Some springs ran dry. Others became tainted, too hot to drink, or carrying a metallic bitterness that sickened those who tasted it. Reservoirs had to be rationed. Whole districts of the lower city were abandoned, their cisterns empty, their halls echoing and dry. The air, once fresh and cool even in the deepest corridors, grew stale. The ventilation shafts, carefully designed to channel air from the surface down into the mines, no longer functioned as intended. Some were blocked by cave-ins. Others had been sealed deliberately when the dwarves closed off sections threatened by the Balrog's heat. Breathing in the lower halls became labor. Food became scarce. The dwarves were not farmers. They relied on trade, grain and livestock brought from human settlements in the valleys, or from elven lands in exchange for metal and craft. But with Eregion fallen and the West Gate sealed, those trade routes were severed. The eastern roads remained, yes, but they were long and dangerous, passing through orc-infested hills and the shadow of Mirkwood. Caravans arrived less frequently. Prices rose. Stockpiles dwindled. The dwarves adapted as best they could. They cultivated mushrooms in the dark, raised blind fish in underground pools, hunted what little game existed in the mountains' caves. But it was subsistence, not abundance. A people who had once feasted were now rationing. And then there were the tremors. The Balrog, prowling the deepest halls, did not remain still. Its presence warped the stone around it. Heat radiated from the lowest levels, causing the rock to expand and contract, to crack and shift. Small earthquakes rippled through the city, nothing catastrophic at first, but frequent enough to be unnerving. A pillar cracked here. A ceiling collapsed there. A bridge spanning one of the great chasms groaned and sagged under its own weight. The dwarves repaired what they could, but there were limits. Stonecraft could patch a crack, shore up a wall, but it could not undo the fundamental instability. The mountain itself was being undermined from within, and the population, it dwindled. Not through slaughter, not yet, but through attrition. Families left quietly for the safety of other holds. Some went north to the Grey Mountains, where dragons had not yet stirred. Others went east to the Iron Hills, where Durin's kin had established a foothold. A few even ventured west, seeking refuge among distant relations in the Blue Mountains. The exodus was slow, almost imperceptible. But each year the halls grew emptier. Each year fewer hammers rang in the forges. Each year the songs grew quieter. The young dwarves especially chose to leave. They saw no future in Khazad dûm. The wealth was gone. The mines were sealed. The danger below was whispered about in every tavern and household. Why stay in a dying kingdom when there were new lands to settle, new fortunes to make? The old dwarves remained, out of loyalty, out of stubbornness, out of the refusal to believe that Khazad dûm, Durin's kingdom, the greatest of all dwarven realms, could truly fall. They clung to the past. They told stories of the glory days, when mithril flowed like water and elves walked their halls as friends. They polished the old treasures, sang the old songs, maintained the old rituals. They believed, had to believe, that the kingdom would endure, that the Balrog would tire or retreat or somehow be defeated, that the mines would reopen, that the trade would return, that everything would be as it was. But kingdoms do not resurrect themselves through hope alone, and in the deep places the fire grew stronger. Still, they remained, until Durin VI dared the final descent. The year was 1980 of the Third Age. Khazad dûm had endured for nearly 6,000 years. 25 generations of dwarves had been born, lived, and died within its halls. Durin VI, the latest to bear that storied name, sat upon the throne, a king in title but in truth a steward of decay. He was not a weak king. By all accounts, he was courageous, wise in the ways of stone and governance. But he inherited a kingdom in crisis. The mithril was nearly exhausted. The population was fleeing. The treasury was shrinking. And below, always below, the fire waited. Durin VI faced a choice. He could accept the decline, oversee a managed retreat, guiding his people to safer holds while Khazad dûm was slowly, gracefully abandoned. It would be a bitter legacy, but a pragmatic one. The kingdom would survive elsewhere, or he could fight. He could refuse to be the king who abandoned Durin's realm. He could seek to reclaim the deep mines, to drive back the terror, to prove that the dwarves were still masters of the mountain. He chose to fight. The texts do not tell us why precisely. Perhaps it was pride, the unwillingness to let his name be remembered as the one who surrendered. Perhaps it was desperation, the knowledge that without the deep mithril, the kingdom would collapse economically. Perhaps it was faith, the belief that Durin's spirit, which the dwarves believed was reborn in each successive Durin, would grant him the strength to succeed where others had failed. Or perhaps he simply could not bear the silence. For the Balrog, after years of prowling the lower halls, had grown quiet. The tremors had lessened. The heat had stabilized. Some whispered that the creature had retreated or even perished, that it had been a temporary menace now past. Durin VI gathered his best warriors, his most skilled miners, and descended. They went armed and armored, carrying weapons forged of the finest steel, bearing shields inscribed with runes of protection. They went with torches and lanterns, with maps of the old shafts, with determination and hope. They went deep, deeper than the sealed mines, deeper than the last known vein. Down staircases that had not been trodden in decades, through corridors where the walls still bore scorch marks from the Balrog's earlier ascent. And they found it. In a vast chamber, a chasm so wide and deep that their lights could not touch its far walls, the Balrog waited. It was not sleeping. It was watching. The dwarves saw it as a shape of shadow and flame, manlike but towering, wrapped in darkness that seemed to drink the light. Its eyes burned like coals. In one hand it held a whip of many thongs, each tipped with fire. Its breath was smoke. Its voice, if it spoke, was the roar of a furnace. Durin VI stepped forward. The texts do not record his words. Perhaps he challenged the creature. Perhaps he demanded it leave his halls. Perhaps he said nothing and simply raised his axe. It did not matter. The Balrog moved. Not slowly, as one might expect from something so vast. It moved like flame itself, sudden, consuming. The whip lashed out, and where it struck, armor melted, stone cracked. The dwarves fought back, axes and swords ringing against shadow, but their weapons could not bite. The flames could not be quenched. Durin VI fell, not in a glorious duel, not after a long struggle. The Balrog killed him as a man might crush an insect, swiftly, almost contemptuously. His body burned. His crown melted. His name was added to the long, long list of those slain by servants of Morgoth. The dwarves who had come with him fled. Some made it back to the upper halls. Others did not. The Balrog pursued, not far, but far enough to ensure the message was clear. Khazad dûm was no longer the dwarves' kingdom. It belonged to the fire. News of Durin's death spread through the city like wildfire. Nain I, his son, assumed the throne. And Nain, driven by grief and fury, refused to accept his father's fate. He gathered an even larger force, warriors from every clan, every hall, every family that still remained. He vowed to avenge Durin, to slay the Balrog, to reclaim the kingdom. He descended, and he too fell, slain in the same chamber, burned by the same fire. This time the dwarves did not return to fight. They returned to flee. panic seized the city. The realization that even their greatest warriors, their king and his heir, could not stand against the creature shattered the last illusions of safety. If Durin himself could not save them, what hope did anyone have? The exodus began in earnest. Families grabbed what they could carry, tools, heirlooms, food, and fled toward the eastern gates. The forges were abandoned mid-work, the anvils still hot. The great halls, which had echoed with song for millennia, emptied in days. The Balrog did not pursue the fleeing dwarves. It did not need to. It simply moved upward, claiming hall after hall, filling the city with smoke and shadow. The lower levels became impassable, then the middle levels, then the upper. The gates were thrown open. Thousands poured out into the daylight, blinking, stunned, homeless. They looked back at the mountain, at the smoke rising from the shafts, and wept. Khazad dûm, the mansion of Durin, the greatest kingdom ever built by mortal hands, was lost. And in its place, a new name took root: Moria, the Black Pit. But even then, the dwarves did not abandon Khazad dûm entirely. Not yet. Here is a truth seldom spoken in the histories. The fall of Khazad dûm was not a single event. It was a process. A long, painful bleeding out that took not days, but years, perhaps even decades. The Great Exodus of 1981 saw the majority of the population flee east to the Iron Hills and north to the Grey Mountains. Nain Ai's son, Thrain Ai, led them into exile and eventually founded a new kingdom beneath the lonely mountain, Erebor. The official seat of Durin's line moved with him, but not all the dwarves left. Scattered throughout the texts, Appendix A, notes in the peoples of Middle-earth, marginal comments in Tolkien's drafts, are hints that some remained. Small groups, stubborn and loyal, who refused to abandon their ancestral home. Why? Some stayed to guard the tombs. Dwarves revere their dead beyond almost all else, and the tombs of Durin, where the kings of Khazad dûm lay in state, surrounded by treasures and memories, were sacred. To leave them unguarded, to let them fall into the hands or flames of the Balrog, was unthinkable. So they stayed. Small bands of warriors and caretakers, living in the outermost halls, venturing only as far as the tombs and no farther. They kept watch. They sang the old songs. They waited, hoping that someday the kingdom might be reclaimed. Others stayed out of sheer stubbornness. These were the old miners, the craftsmen, the lords who had spent their entire lives in Khazad dûm and could not imagine living anywhere else. They retreated to the far eastern halls near the great gates and tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. They lit the forges, carefully, quietly, so as not to draw the Balrog's attention. They mined the shallow veins that remained. They rationed food and water and hope. They endured. For how long, we do not know. A year, 10, 50. Tolkien does not give us exact dates, but the implication is clear. Khazad dûm did not empty overnight. The abandonment was gradual, wave after wave of departures, until eventually, the last holdouts realized there was nothing left to hold. There are stories, fragmentary, unconfirmed, of attempts to reclaim sections of the city. Of Dwarven war bands, sent from Erebor or the Iron Hills, marching back to Moria to drive out the Balrog or at least secure the upper halls. Some of these expeditions made it inside. Some even managed to hold territory for a time, but none succeeded in killing the Balrog. The creature was simply too powerful, too elemental. It could not be cornered, could not be trapped. It moved through the mountain as it pleased, and wherever it went, the dwarves could not follow. Eventually, the attempt ceased. The dwarves accepted the loss. They turned their efforts toward building new kingdoms, Erebor in the east, the Iron Hills to the north. They thrived for a time in these new lands. They sang songs of Khazad dûm, but as a memory, not a living place. It became legend, myth. A cautionary tale told to young dwarves about the dangers of delving too deep. Moria was abandoned, or so the world believed. But even in abandonment, Khazad dûm was not empty. The Balrog remained, of course, lurking in the deep places, content in its reclaimed darkness. But other things moved in as well. Orcs, fleeing the light and seeking refuge, found the halls defensible and vast. They established warrens in the upper levels, breeding and raiding the lands around the mountains. Trolls made lairs in the old storerooms. Bats and vermin infested the corridors. The kingdom of stone became a kingdom of filth. The great pillars, carved to resemble trees, cracked and crumbled. The ceilings, no longer maintained, collapsed in places, burying halls and treasures beneath rubble. The aqueducts dried up or overflowed, flooding entire levels. The forges went cold. The lights went out. Khazad dûm became a tomb, but tombs can be opened. And in the year 2989 of the Third Age, nearly 1,000 years after the fall, a dwarf lord named Bane tried. Bane had been part of Thorin Oakenshield's company, the quest of a Reber that ended with the death of Smaug and the reclamation of the lonely mountain. He was old, but not yet ancient. And he carried a dream to reclaim Moria, to restore the halls of Durin, to return his people to their greatest kingdom. He gathered a company of dwarves, skilled warriors, miners, craftsmen, and marched west. They entered through the East Gate, the great gate that had once welcomed armies and caravans. They found it open, rusted, but still standing. They established a foothold. For 5 years, Balin's colony endured. They cleared halls. They relit forges. They even found mithril, small veins enough to kindle hope. Bane took the title Lord of Moria and ruled from the chamber of Mazarbul, the Hall of Records. But the dream was doomed. The orcs, driven out at first, returned in greater numbers. The Balrog, disturbed by the new activity, began to stir. And in the year 2994, Bane was slain, shot by an orc archer while standing beside the Mirrormere, the very lake where Durin had first seen his crown of stars. The colony collapsed. The dwarves were slaughtered or driven out. The halls fell silent once more. And yet, could Khazad dûm have been saved? Let us step outside the flow of history for a moment and ask the heretical question. Was the fall of Khazad dûm inevitable? Or were there moments, choices, alliances, decisions that, if made differently, might have saved it? Tolkien was not a writer of alternate histories. His world was one of fate and doom, where the great patterns were woven by powers beyond mortal ken. And yet, his texts are filled with if-onlys, moments where the thread might have turned another way. Consider, what if Celebrimbor had lived? If Sauron had not deceived the elves of a region, if the rings of power had never been forged, if the war had never come, would the West Gate have remained open? Would the alliance between elf and dwarf have endured? With Eregion thriving, Khazad dûm would not have turned inward. Trade would have continued. The economy would have diversified. The mithril might not have become so desperately needed. The dwarves might not have delved so deep. And if they had not delved deep, the Balrog might have slept forever. Consider, what if Sauron had never attacked Eregion? Even with the One Ring forged, Sauron might have chosen a different target. He might have turned his attention east or south, or waited longer before striking. The downfall of Eregion was not fated. It was a choice, a military campaign driven by Sauron's desire to seize the rings and dominate the West. If Eregion had survived, the political landscape of the Second Age would have been radically different. Khazad dûm would have remained a partner in a thriving alliance, not an isolated fortress. Consider, what if the mithril had not grown scarce? Geology is not fate. The veins of mithril did not have to run out, or at least not so quickly. Perhaps they were overmined. Perhaps the dwarves could have managed the resource more carefully, rationed it, sought other sources of wealth. If mithril had remained abundant, there would have been no need to dig into the deep places. The economic pressure that drove the dwarves downward might never have existed. Consider, what if the dwarves had fought differently? When the Balrog awoke, the dwarves tried to seal it below. They tried to ignore it. And when confrontation became inevitable, they sent their king alone with a small force into the deep. But what if they had gathered a full army? What if they had called for aid from their kin in other holds, from the elves of Lothlorien, even from the scattered kingdoms of men? A Balrog is a terrible foe, but it is not invincible. Gandalf slew one, eventually, in single combat. A coordinated assault with fire and water, with clever tactics and overwhelming force might have succeeded. Or consider the deepest what if of all. What if the dwarves had chosen to leave willingly before the Balrog awoke? If they had seen the signs, the failing mines, the isolation, the unsustainability, and decided to resettle in a new land while Khazad dûm was still glorious, still intact. They could have left it as a monument, a sacred place visited but not inhabited. They could have avoided the tragedy entirely, but they did not. Because the dwarves were not a people who abandoned their works. They were builders, creators, holders of stone. To leave Khazad dûm would have been to admit defeat, not to an enemy, but to time itself. And that perhaps was a defeat they could not bear. Tolkien understood this. His dwarves are tragic precisely because their greatest strength, their loyalty, their stubbornness, their refusal to yield is also their greatest weakness. They hold on when they should let go. They dig when they should climb. They endure when they should flee. And in that tension, the professor wove a story not of good versus evil, but of pride versus wisdom. Could Khazad dûm have been saved? Perhaps, but only if the dwarves had been willing to become something other than themselves. And that, in the end, is why the fall feels so inevitable. Not because the Balrog was unstoppable, not because fate decreed it, but because the dwarves, being who they were, could not have chosen any other path. But history carves its path in stone, and that stone remembers. More than 1,000 years after Balin's fall, a small company passed through Moria. 9 walkers, bearing a burden that would decide the fate of the world. Among them, a dwarf named Gimli, son of Gloin, who had never seen the halls of his ancestors and longed for them with a deep, aching hope. When the fellowship entered the east gate and descended into darkness, Gimli wept. Not for the ruin, though the ruin was vast, but for the beauty that remained. The pillars, though cracked, still soared. The carvings, though worn, still spoke of ancient skill. The chambers, though empty, still echoed with grandeur. He saw what Khazad dûm had been, and he mourned what it could never be again. In the chamber of Mazarbul, they found Balin's tomb, a simple stone slab inscribed with runes. Gimli read them aloud, his voice breaking. Balin, son of Fundin, lord of Moria. Not king, not victor, just lord. A title claimed in hope and held in defiance for 5 short years. And around the tomb, the bones of those who had tried to reclaim the dream. The fellowship did not linger. They fled through the halls, pursued by orcs and the shadow of the Balrog itself. And in that flight on the bridge of Khazad dûm, a slender arch of stone spanning an abyss, Gandalf the Grey stood alone against Durin's Bane. You cannot pass. Wizard and demon clashed in fire and lightning, and when the Balrog fell, it dragged Gandalf down with it, into the depths from which neither would return, at least not as they were. The Fellowship escaped, but Moria remained, and remains still. In the Fourth Age, after Sauron's fall and the departure of the elves, the world changed. Men rose to dominance. The dwarves, though diminished, endured. And there are hints, fragile, uncertain, that Durin's line considered once more reclaiming Khazad dûm. With the Balrog slain and the orcs scattered, the halls were empty again, waiting. Tolkien never wrote that reclamation. He left it as a possibility, a hope deferred. In some of his later notes, he suggested that Durin VII, the last of his line, might lead his people back to the mountain in the distant future, that the forges might burn again, that the songs might return. But it is only a suggestion, a dream, because the point of Khazad dûm's story is not that it can be reclaimed. The point is that it was lost. And in that loss, we see the truth of Tolkien's world, that all things pass. That even the greatest works, the most beautiful cities, the mightiest kingdoms, the most enduring legacies are not eternal. They rise, they flourish, they fall. And what remains? Memory. The songs the dwarves still sing, passed down from father to son, mother to daughter, across the ages. The names still spoken with reverence: Durin, Khazad dûm, Moria. The tales told in halls far from the mountain, by firelight in quiet voices. The echo. Gimli, after the War of the Ring, became the Lord of the Glittering Caves, another wonder beneath the earth found in the hills of Rohan. He never returned to Moria, but he carried it with him in memory, in longing. And when he sailed west with Legolas into the uttermost west, the only dwarf ever granted that grace, perhaps he carried those halls with him still. Perhaps in the blessed realm, he walked through Khazad dûm as it was in its glory, before the fire, before the fall. Perhaps. Or perhaps the halls remain empty, dark, and silent, waiting not for reclamation, but for the ending of all things, when the world is remade and the ancient places are finally laid to rest. Either way, the story endures. Because Khazad dûm is more than a place. It is a symbol of ambition and beauty, of pride and tragedy, of the cost of creation and the inevitability of loss. It is a reminder that to build something great is also to build something that can fall. And yet the dwarves built anyway. They delved, they carved, they sang, they endured, and even in ruin their work speaks. The halls are empty, but the songs remain, echoing softly beneath the mountains, waiting for Durin's heir to return. Dear listener, this story ends, but many await. Subscribe so no tale escapes you.